with a massive 24-litre aircraft engine. Hello, welcome to the Motorsport Detective. I'm Alex Burnham. In part one of our little mini-series, we've been looking at some 8mm cine film taken at an unknown historic event from Donington Park. We've been trying to track down when it took place and some of the details behind it. So hopefully now we can continue searching and maybe find some answers. By identifying a BMW M1 that had been racing in the Donington GT series, we were able to narrow it down to an early 80s event. Then by creating a list and using programs and race reports, we've been able to go through looking for some sort of corroborating evidence so that we can find out what event is taking place. So far, we've not had much luck, but I'm hoping we can get there soon. On my list of potential events, I've pretty much worked through all of 1984. And I don't think it is in there. However, there's a couple of dates left on the 1983 side which I'm going to chase down, and hopefully it'll be one of those. Okay, I think we've found it. Part of the problem is that the weekend of our race meeting, the Saturday and the Sunday event, were very, very different. Our event took place in June of 1983, and I think what was confusing me quite a lot was the programme of races over the weekend varied greatly. You see, on the Saturday of that weekend, you had the British Saloon Car Championship, or British Touring Cars as we now call it. You had one make support series and sort of modern Formula series all running like a modern day touring car weekend. Then on the Sunday, all of a sudden it switches to being a historic event with our Formula Ford and GT races thrown in. So a real eclectic mix of events over that weekend. So I'm pretty sure we have found our event. So now we can go back to our footage and check for all the corresponding details between the cine film and our programme. So the first race meeting of that Sunday was for pre-33 sports cars. We don't seem to have any footage of that. However, race number 2 was for pre-war racing cars, more like Grand Prix machinery, and a lot of this is in our footage. Now this number 24 car is quite interesting. That's a Delage V12 land speed record machine. There's a variety of little Bugattis and ERAs, just like that number 1 machine. Number 8 is a Maserati 4CL from 1939. This big red machine is the Bentley Napier with a massive 24-litre aircraft engine in it. That's one of those Alfa Romeo P3s from the 1930s. At number 2, that's an ERA Type B. Now, it appeared from our footage that the winner of this race is the driver of that number 2 ERA. This is Peter Mann, and you can see as he gets out of his car and onto that Austin Princess podium vehicle to be driven around the circuit for a lap of honour, towing that Mercedes Grand Prix car of the 1930s. The next race in our programme is for these sports racing cars, things like listed Jaguars, Jaguar D-types, and again we don't seem to have any footage of that. We jump straight on to the post-war Grand Prix car race. Here we can see that little DB Panhard on the grid. Now it should be pointed out that thing only has an 850cc engine and it's front wheel drive, and it's up against some proper 60s Grand Prix machines, things like Lotuses and Maseratis and Ferraris. It's pretty brave for the driver to be in that race at all, because he's going to be well outclassed around the high speed turns of Donington. Car 14 there, that's a Talbot Lago with that Cooper Bristol in the background, car number 22. Car number 9 tucked in the middle there, that's a Maserati 250. Car 2 is a Lotus 16, and car 7 is another Maserati, and in the book that's down as being driven by Nick Mason, drummer of the Pink Floyd rock group. Car 17 is very interesting. That's a Connaught, but it's a streamlined car. I think that deserves a little quick investigation. Turns out that Connaught Streamline is really interesting. It dates from 1955 when the Connaught team were racing in Formula 1, and many other teams have tried streamlining, most notably Mercedes-Benz. But Connaught had decided to do their own thing. They're credited with being the first team to have a dedicated wind tunnel in Formula 1, and this is where they developed that streamlined body. So apparently it made its debut at Goodwood in 1955 and would go on to have some success. Apparently Tony Brooks drove it to victory at the Syracuse Grand Prix in October of 1955. The website primotipo.com has a nice page on the Connell Type B streamliner, and it says about 7 were made. So having footage of Donington Park where it raced, well, that's quite good fun and a bit unique. Next race in our footage is this international sports car race, which is a big grid and some impressive machinery. Lots of Lolas, McLarens, Chevrons, Porsches, all of the big machinery from the 1960s and 70s sports car scene. There we see a Gulf livery Ford GT40. Just ahead of that number 4, an unusual Chevron B16, because these cars tend to have a hard top to them rather than being in this spider configuration. Car 77 there is quite an impressive March 707 as raced in the Can-Am series. Ran with a great big 5-litre Chevrolet V8, powerful machine with an awful lot of that aero trickery on it. Car 2 there is a Lola T70. Interestingly, car 8 is listed as a Gulf liveried Porsche 917, which it clearly isn't in the footage. Now this sort of thing could throw a spanner in the works and mean, oh, I forgot the wrong event. But often there are substitutions at race weekends. A car isn't able to compete for some reason and a driver might enter something else. Sometimes there are even reserve drivers and entrants into a meeting, so I'm not overly worried by that. Sometimes it's interesting to see the differences between what was printed before the event and what actually happened on the day. Great shot there of that McLaren M8D, the big Can-Am machinery. Next up on our footage we have the Donington Gt Race, which included that BMW M1 lookalike. Many of these machines, although they externally look like a Lotus, BMW M1, or even down to a humble Mini or Hillman Imp, underneath the skin they've got huge great engines, space frame chassis, and they're very sophisticated pieces of equipment. Now this car 77 intrigued me. I couldn't quite place what it was due to all of the extra bodywork that's been added. So I looked in the programme, car 77, and we have Rob Cox driving a Caterham Super Brick. Now I've no idea what that is, so I think that deserves a quick investigation. There's a website all about this Caterham and the driver Rob Cox, known as the Black Brick. Blackbrick.de has a list of a variety of different Caterhams that were built and bared this name. By looking at the photographs on this website, we can see the development of this car through various fairings and wings to try and make it more competitive. It would seem that Black Brick 3 is the one that's in our footage. It may only have been running a 1500cc Ford BDA unit, but it's got 210 horsepower. It probably weighs about half a ton and has a race-bred suspension. In fact, Rob Cox would describe this car as comparing favourably with a Toleman Formula 1 car a few years later. The final race in our footage is that Formula Ford 1600 event with a huge great grid of single-seaters. Now I said earlier that sometimes these Formula Ford races can provide some interesting drivers at the start of their career. It does have some drivers starting off in their careers who would go on to be in motorsport for many years to come. People like Andy Wallace, who would win the Le Mans 24 Hours several times, including with the Works Bentley and Jaguar teams. Andy Middlehurst, who would go on to race in the British Touring Car Championship. Maurizio Sandrasala, who would again have a good career at Le Mans. Andrew Gilbert Scott, who would move to Japan and win the Japanese Touring Car Championship. And Ross Cheever, who would end up racing American Indy cars and Champ cars. So an interesting day's racing from Donington Park as captured on our Super 8mm cine footage. An interesting snapshot back into 1983 racing with a whole variety of machines and drivers taking part. It's interesting footage and I hope you've enjoyed discovering alongside me what we are looking for. Please do subscribe to the Motorsport Detectives channel, find me on social media and come back for more motorsport mysteries in the future.